Cool. Well, I'll hand it over to you then, Christopher.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon your time zone. Thank you for joining our one of our month-long forum presentations. My name is Christopher Leidy. I'm part of what is sort of known as the Extension Developer Liaison Group, and we try and work with developers to both help them with development as well as general issues concerning extensions in Thunderbird. Today's presentation is on Thunderbird KDB knowledge base and the xpiLib part of that repository. And basically this is one of several resources for developers doing extension development for Thunderbird. Basically the impetus was that everybody needs code examples pretty much no matter what they're doing. And given that extensions are all open source and managed by the Thunderbird ATN site, it became evident that it'd be great to just offer all of the code in one place so that you could do better searches and look how people solved problems that ostensibly other people have the same issue. So I'm going to go through the various aspects of how this repository can be used to help people find, ideally, solutions to their extension development issues. So the first thing to note, because I don't think everybody is aware of it, I wasn't till recently, is that GitHub has a sort of normal repository view that everybody is familiar with, but there's also a GitHub Pages view, which is a completely different URL namespace that essentially allows you to host basic websites, including client-side JavaScript code on GitHub. But because it's a different namespace, you have to just make sure that you understand how to navigate between the two sides. So I want to just kind of show that as the very first thing. So Ryan, if you can click us into the top level of the GitHub Pages site. So this now is the actual GitHub web pages, GitHub Pages entry point to ThunderKdB and the xpiLib. So you can see it looks like a regular website. We're not just rendering some markdown code that is in the current directories. So it gives us a better navigation and some computing capability. Go back to the nav page. And let's click into the regular repository. So this is obviously totally familiar as your top level repository page, where typically you would have your top level README. But the idea is instead of having README files for the UI, we're using the GitHub Pages. To get back to the GitHub Pages, you can use the link in the README here, and we'll go back to the scope and the navigation page for the ThunderKdB resources. So basically, the ThunderKdB repository has one main resource and then several pieces of functionality we can use against those. The most basic thing is we've collected every single extension and put all of its code as well as metadata into this single repository. Additionally, and one of the main reasons that this was started was to try and have some reports that people could access easily that would tell you the status of every extension in terms of its compatibility and maybe some features. So you'll see at the top there's several different reports that you can do, which we'll take a look at in a second. The second part is getting into the code library where you have all of the extensions and you have a search tool that deals with just this repository, so you can eliminate what can be lots and lots of noise when you try and search for things across GitHub at large. Then the last part of the functionality is using GitHub's issue section to be able to have what are not bug reports, but rather solution discussions and sometimes just to things like widget replacements. And we'll talk about what I mean there when we go to the issues at the end. But let's start and just give you an idea of some of the extension reports that kind of give you a quick and easy way, differently than searching for things on ATN, just to give you more of a developer view. So let's go to the all extensions list. And you can see here that we have 1,375 extensions, which should be the entire set of extensions regardless of version compatibility, going all the way back to Thunderbird's origins. And they're sorted by their usage. So the most common popular extensions at the top and then down to the bottom, which may be brand new extensions that just haven't gotten popular yet. And this is basically giving you two things. It gives you some of the basic compatibility information, both in terms of the versions as well as the types of extensions, whether they're legacy or non-legacy, etc. It also serves as a navigation point. So let's, for instance, look at import-export tools, which just selfishly happens to be one that I maintain. And if we click on the home symbol, we actually get to the ATN entries. So sometimes you want to get more information that is kind of user-oriented, which we can jump back to ATN. So close that and go back. But if we want the information on the code and other metadata, we can click the name of the extension and we will get access to a little bit more info. Now, this is a little bit bare. I want to add more things like the versions, but it gives us an ability, for instance, to get the full description, and we can also go right to the code if you click the source tree under core files. And now you see we actually get to the code, which we'll come back to later. Go back to the nav page. So one of the last reports is the 2-week activity. So if you want to see what some of the latest and greatest work people are doing, this gives you the 2-week set of extensions that have gone through review and are now available. So you'll see that a bunch of these are people working either on code up to 73 or even some pure mail extension types of files. So you can see like the latest activity will most likely give you good information on things that are, going along with Thunderbird beta development. Let's go back to the nav page. So that basically is kind of the overview information for the reporting side. But the real good thing is where you can eliminate the very noisy searches if you were to search GitHub at large. And one other thing that's important for people to understand about where all this code comes from is that many extensions pre-exist GitHub and their authors may never have put them on GitHub, or they might be in alternate repositories. So the idea again here is that we gather everything and put it on GitHub so that it doesn't matter where the author's original or current repo is. So let's go to the code library and just show how things are. So basically, this whole structure was started during the transition from 60 to 68. And I have to do some updates to represent the next update to 78. So I'll be doing probably some more tagging for things like that. But for right now, the repository stores every extension into either 60 compatible, 68 or above compatible, and then everything below 60 is in X other. And Ryan, if you can go into X68 as an example. So you'll see every folder has the ID of the extension as a prefix, and then the ID, the slug name of the extension following that. If you pick any one, Ryan, you'll see what the structure inside looks like. So at the top level, we have the metadata, which is generated by the library. In other words, it's not part of the extension, it's descriptive information about the extension. If you go into xpi, you will see that there is just a single file, which is the actual latest only XPI of the extension. So if you wanted to download it and then have it on your own machine, you could just download the whole thing from there. So if you go back up and now go into source, you'll see now we have the decompressed XPI, and you can do look-see at any file just as you would, any other file on GitHub. So once you are looking at a particular extension, you don't even have to download it if you want to just peruse it. But before you get here, you may want to figure out what extensions are doing similar things to what I'm doing. So let's go back to our search ability, which is back from our nav thing. We can do an xpiLib search. So the most important thing to understand here is that this is a UI interface to GitHub search capability. So whatever limitations, and there are some important ones I'll mention, that GitHub search has, I have, because I didn't want to recreate a search system. I just wanted to make it tailored to the extensions and within the ThunderKdB repository. So for instance, if we do a search on, let's say, the word permissions, and permissions are something that are new to Thunderbird extensions because they're part of the manifest file for mail extensions, which are the Thunderbird equivalent of web extensions. So let's say you're starting to think about, how you would deal with different security capabilities. Now you can just jump to any of the extensions that use permissions that are found in the manifest file. And you can see that we've got, a good 3,000 or so showing in the different code spaces. Pretty basic, just a single word. But if we go back, one of the things that's really important to understand is the limitation of GitHub searches. You can't use any special symbolic characters, which is crazy. Forget about regex, but you can't even use a period, for instance, for like object notation. So if we type in the word browser action, and then let's say we wanted to see people using the set title method, add period set title. What GitHub is actually going to do is it's going to ignore the period and assume that we're searching for two words. And you'll see in the search results what that looks like. So unfortunately, the first example, it really is not showing the period. It's just showing the two words. And you can see it picks up just browser action on the second. So unfortunately, this is one limitation that unfortunately you just have to work around because GitHub does not have that. There appears to be some search improvements that I have to look at that might allow special characters, but I think it's in beta and I don't know how good or effective it will be. So if we go back, you can see that if we uncheck all and we click Thunderbird 68 and we click the drop down and just do JavaScript files, you can again get, far fewer search results. Most likely not too different in this case, but if you had words that showed up in different places, you might improve it by reducing that. So you can see far fewer there, or a couple fewer examples. So again, this allows you to get the things with far fewer results. If you were to do a search on all of GitHub for just the word browser action, you would come up with 125,000 hits. So that's a lot of stuff to then have to sort through. The one other thing to note here is that I do have one outside repository that can be searched, which is a Thunder nest, which is where the example files like Hello World and different API examples exist. So I wanted to make sure those would be included too, even though they are not official extensions. And eventually I'll probably have some other resources there as they become available. The bottom is basically just limiting searches to the various locale files, which are DTD and property for old extensions and JSON for new ones. So if you were trying to quickly look up, how different words or phrases have been translated, you can grab those from those files. I think that's pretty straightforward. Let's go back to the nav. I'm sorry. Go back to one of the code results or do the search on the browser activity. I do like add message as a search.
Down here?
No, up in the code one.
Just add message like this?
Yeah, so this is one of the functions that my extensions have to use a lot, or anybody dealing with adding email messages. And there's all sorts of preconditions and setup for it. So now you can go and see all the different ways people use this. And if we, for instance, go to one of those files and click on it, we'll jump right into the code. And now we're on the code side, and assuming that this extension does something interesting for you, you could go and look at all the code by navigating that part of the repository just like any other. And again, if you decided, no, I don't like this approach, maybe you go back to a different extension and see what other people are doing. But again, you can imagine that the results looking for this across all of GitHub would probably be pretty big and maybe very many things that have nothing to do with Thunderbird. So let's go back to our nav. So the last thing that the repository has is an issue section, which again is not used for bugs, but rather like solution discussions. So one specific example, which I did a while ago, was I found an alternate solution for the list element in Thunderbird, which was deprecated several months ago. And so you have to figure out how you're going to replace it in new Thunderbird versions. So if you go down to the list box issue, basically it's a discussion of the deprecation, and then it talks about some of the different ways that you could approach the replacement. You could use the tree element, which still exists, or you could do something like I did, which was find a more simple alternative library, and then I give links to how it's used. So if you look at farther down the list.js, where I have it, of course, I managed to give an example that I don't have. This gives an example of pointing to the TV sync extension, which is using the rich list box. So if you click on that, it'll just take you to the code again within the library, so you can see how they used a rich list box replacement. If we go back to the list and then go to the date picker, this is an example of another element that got deprecated and changed, and I decided to use a third-party open source, and I give links to the original code, and then if you look at the example under Thunderstats, you'll see the actual use of the code in that extension. So here we actually show each of the locations in the code so you can quickly get an idea of how to use this element as a replacement if it's appropriate. Some of the other things in the issue list are a little more general. For instance, you'll see there's one talking about modules and how they change in the new Thunderbird extensions. There's also things about how status bar changed. Unfortunately, you'll see the list is rather small. So I'm hoping that as more people get visibility and they come up with additional examples of solutions for the new Thunderbird extensions, that people can add things here like any normal issue edition, and then that gives people the ability to find, sort of atomic solutions to various things. If we go back to the nav page, so the very last thing is just important to note that, these are all open source, but they all have slightly different licenses. And you just want to make sure that, when you're potentially using other people's code, you follow all the normal licensing appropriate steps. So that's basically it. Not super complicated by any means. It's really an efficiency tool, which I decided after downloading lots of XPIs, it would probably be better just to get them in one place. So that was what resulted in this. So I think now, instead of rambling more, I'd open it up for any questions.
Anyone have any questions? I don't see any in the chat. Oh, Jorg, go ahead. Do you want to voice it?
Yeah, I don't know what my microphone situation is here. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, well, my question has always been, and finally I get the chance to ask it, you whacked all those extensions into GitHub, right? Don't they have any volume restrictions? I mean, that must be a lot of data.
Actually, that's a good point. I actually saw a search limitation of 500K files, which I'm probably very close to. But so far, I haven't hit anything. I mean, one thing I don't do is I don't host anything but the latest version. It's not too hard to get old versions, but that would have really increased the number of files. So right now we're okay. Hopefully, continue. Otherwise, I'll probably have to make a second repository just to house code, and they'll be, maybe split off by, compatibility or something.
Uh-huh. So you haven't received any angry email from GitHub saying that you've got too much stuff on there?
No, and you know, I'm a little surprised because it is quite a bit of stuff. So I don't know. You know, I'm going along merrily, hoping nothing happens.
Mhm. Do you have volume, megabytes or gigabytes or whatever it is?
Do I know how much?
Yeah.
No, I haven't. I haven't looked lately, but it's, you know, it's clearly up in the gigabytes.
Well, if something
Okay.
does happen, then theoretically, I mean, we could get like a paid plan. There should be. I mean, it's not like it's expensive to get some more space from them, and there is Thunderbird does have a budget. Could go to that, like what, a few dollars a month or something.
Yeah, I mean, if you know, if it looks like I'm close, I mean, I can do a little research and see if we're hitting anything, but it wouldn't be too terrible, for instance, to break off like all the sub 60 code, which is a lot, you know, just to keep the most recent because I have the GitHub Pages interface. It could be seamless to the user if we had to split it. But if we didn't, it's obviously better for maintenance.
Any other questions?
I guess. Oh, so let Paul ask his question first.
Sure. Paul, you want to ask your question?
Sure. I mean, this may be a silly one, but for the GitHub search, does it work to put things in quotes for periods and other punctuation marks like that?
Unfortunately, I just reaffirmed before the call because it's so ludicrous. But the basic answer is no. What the quotes will do is allow you to search for two legitimate symbols, you know, let's say separated by a space. But if you put the period there, it totally ignores it and comes up with nothing. So the quotes don't help you. You know, it's absolutely crazy. But you think about it, you can't search on any code symbols, you know, equal sign or anything like that. They're all just nulled out. As I said, I think they may have some beta for something that would allow you to do what would be a quoted exact example, but it would still not be regex. But, you know, it's basically, you know, once we filtered out the rest of GitHub, at least, you know, you don't come up with too much extra stuff. Especially because, you know, if you have two terms that are usually together, like I gave the example, the browser action, you'll usually get to what you want without hopefully too much extra noise. It's really absurd that GitHub search excluded the symbols. I understand the regex, but man, that's a weird one.
Yeah.
I think I saw somebody comment GitHub's search is notoriously bad, but I didn't see who it was, but I agree.
Yeah, that's really weird for a code hosting site to not have that as part of their search. So, oh well, maybe someday they'll.
Yeah, so I just saw yesterday because I wanted to check up that they have something that sounds like it might improve it, but I have to play with it. There was very little documentation. Yeah, did you have another question?
So my question is about the set of issues in the Thunder KDB repository. So there, okay, I'll ask and you can answer whenever you're.
Wait, yeah.
You're very quiet.
You're very, I can't hear you over my background noise.
My question is, there are currently 19 issues, all counted. Are you satisfied with that amount, or do we feel that there's an under filing of issues here by people who've already worked on updating their extension and could have possibly contributed more and like more than zero, say, issues? And if the answer is that we should have more issues, then do you have any suggestions on how we can get people to file them, say, retroactively?
Well, the answer to we have too few issues is absolutely yes. Basically, it just has kind of the initial examples that I put in, a couple yourself, and maybe two others. And I think it's basically just the fact that, even if somebody has used xpiLib searching code, which is arguably the most typical usage, the issues are kind of less obvious. And I have not, other than in the beginning about, maybe 5 months ago, posted comments for people to look at and potentially contribute. So I think it's really a matter of trying to figure out, to your last statement, how we, encourage, ask, point people to, posting some solutions, because very well that lots of people are battling things. It's just a question of, people taking the time to, put something there that they share with the community. So suggestions are welcome. I mean, hopefully after this presentation, it will have, a little more exposure. But, when I look at the usage, it's, there's not a ton of people using the library yet, but, hopefully that will improve.
Well, once the version, what is it, 78 is released, I'm sure there'll be will be awash with people asking questions about how to do this and how to do that. And if at that time we, not to say that we don't have to do anything until then, but at that time it would be a good idea for everyone, even if we answer somebody's question or if we find an answer to something ourselves, to remember to point out that it's a good idea to file an issue here about it, describing the solution.
Yeah, and I think that one important thing to mention is that, there's been a variety of discussion about, where things go. So, what's the difference between topic box and the issue section ThunderKdB? Well, I look at it as a very simple difference. Topic box is kind of ask a question, maybe get a couple of responses on a specific thing, and then you go off and hopefully solve your problem. The issue section of ThunderKdB is ideally meant to capture the end results. So when somebody comes up with a good solution, it's memorialized in a place that you can point easily to code or gist, which is really not the case on Topic Box. So, and it's not at all meant to be anything having to do with Bugzilla, because it's not reporting problems. The only problems that should be in the issue section are if people want to report problems with the actual, UI and stuff like that, or to make suggestions. So I agree that, once we get closer to more people working on it will maybe come up with some, could be issue templates for describing solutions or whatever, but, make it easy for people to add to it.
Maybe we could also go over the the top 10 or top something most popular ones in terms of users, and maybe reach out individually to people on that list who haven't yet posted any issues there, and ask if they can contribute something from their own experience so far.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I saw, Ryan, I saw another question pop up,
Yes.
but I couldn't see it completely.
Sure. Tito, do you want to read yours or do you want me to read it?
Hi, Christopher. First of all, thank you for the presentation and for your work. My question is regarding the requirements for extension to land on this list. Is there any kind of requirement, since I do not see some of the extensions that I'll be interested in, and if there are any requirements, for example, licenses or stuff like that, what are they? Thank you.
Thank you for question of appreciation. But let me just see if I can clarify, because I'm not sure I heard. I understand your question about requirements, but did you say that there were some extensions that did not appear there that you are interested in?
Correct. So I'm using couple of extensions right now for synchronization of my address book that are private, and obviously they will not appear here. Well, the JavaScript code will appear there, but not the binaries for which are basically a C++ binaries with Qt. So I'm just curious, is that a complete list, or is there anything that you are saying will not show any extensions, for example, Borgesing or something like that?
Okay, well, I've been king, god, and dictator of the site, so I've decided so far what to do. But of course, going forward, got to make it the rules and regs work for everybody. So initially, I just did the basics. I basically scan the ATN database and get all of the official ATN extensions. That was the original, impetus and limitation. A little bit after that, I decided that because the Thunder Nest was a set of extension examples, but not official extensions, I added the ability to cross-search that repository. Now, one of the other things that I think especially now is that we've got a couple situations which probably need to be addressed. The first is if people have work in progress that may take a long time and yet would be helpful to show people. Sometimes people do unofficial betas or sort of background work before they actually get to ATN. I think those extensions, if people are willing to be presented within the search, I would add as kind of like, a repository, not a repository, but a list of extensions in progress that are still useful to look at. Now, the last example, which you specifically said, is somebody has a semi-official extension that's private, so it's not on ATM, but nonetheless, maybe it would be good for people to see. I personally see no problem with adding those to a list for everybody's benefit, so far as nobody can come up with a reason not to. I mean, I would assume that the licensing could be different on a private extension, but that doesn't necessarily mean that if the author is willing to publish that you can't do that. It's just it couldn't be included within Thunderbird code proper. But I probably would ask Ryan if for some reason he thinks that would not be acceptable. I mean, at the end of the day, this is a private repository that, can essentially do whatever it wants, but I'm doing it as, a Thunderbird team member, so I want to do it appropriately. Any comments, Ryan?
I think obviously, there are probably some restrictions for what we could put there, but I think we'd have to look into that a little deeper, like, I think more like trademark and things like that, but but if somebody's interested in getting stuff added to that and has a place we can point at, like you did with Thundernest, I don't see any reason why we wouldn't add that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could start by, looking at a particular case. I mean, as I told Jorg, I'd like to make some new lists that kind of deal with, as I said, work in progress, and particularly, things dedicated to 78 and above. And, those may be, more eclectic and, non-official given the state of things, but nonetheless very useful for people. Does that answer your question, Tito?
Yes, thank you.
Yep. Any others?
I don't see any in the chat yet. Now's
Wow.
your chance.
We kept it under an hour.
Yeah. Last call. Anybody want to raise any more questions?
I've got a quick one. Are there any challenges for like longer term maintenance like if new add-ons are introduced, the add-ons change, their code changes, like are there challenges with keeping it up to date as things change?
Well, it's a good point to allow me to state that this major Thunderbird infrastructure is really running on my little computer 6 feet from me. So the answer is, yeah, at some point we want to make this so that it's automated. I basically have a set of scripts which I run on an ad hoc basis because I haven't been able to get it automated yet that does the updates. So, for instance, the first thing you know is that the updates are manually done and are not necessarily done every day. And, eventually it's probably, a useful discussion of whether, it should move over to real infrastructure that can run the processes that are back end that can't be run on the site. So, and of course the scripts, probably need lots of cleanup to be more malleable and able to, be adjusted for new versions and stuff. But right now it's, it's sort of statically okay, minus the manual intervention on my part. Does that kind of hit the point?
Yeah, I think so. So you have scripts that would bring in new extensions added to the extensions website, ATN, and if extensions have new versions with new code, those would get pulled in by the scripts.
Right. I mean, basically, the whole repository sits on my SSD, and I update that local repository, Git repository on my SSD with, scan ATM, pull down the new XPIs, uncompress them, create the new metadata, and then create the reports. And then I just push those up. So, of course, GitHub is not doing any of that. So it's got to be, some quote unquote server side, right now, my little computer operating as such.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, thanks. That helps me understand it.
Good deal.
Good to have a fast SSD.
Yeah. And just circling back around to that, obviously, Christopher, if there's anything we can host, I don't think it would be too much work to spin something up to be backup or the primary instead of that little computer you've got running.
Yeah, we can, kind of talk about it as maybe the usage goes up. And, one of the things which, besides the issues, that EL is referring to in terms of solutions, again, if anybody thinks that, there would be some, really good additions to the structure of the library, search, etc., then you can just post an issue there too. I've got a category tag for ThunderKdB enhancements there as well. It's not separate from the code solutions is my point.
Very good. Anything else? Okay, cool. Well, thank you very much, Christopher. Here's your virtual applause. And I guess, do you want to add anything, like where you want people to reach out to you, or
Well, either, if it's something that is more appropriate email, just shoot me an email, or if it's something, specific to, ThunderKdB, then just put an issue there and, I'll try and jump on it.
Very good. Well, we really appreciate you taking the time to introduce us to this excellent tool and for taking the time to build this awesome tool. And yeah, we're just really grateful for all the work you've put into this. So
I appreciate it, and I hope that more people can get some use out of it.
Yeah. Very good.
Thank you everybody for taking the time and questions as well. I appreciate the interest.
Yeah, thanks everybody for attending.